a decision that was made by Judge Leon Tucker, and we want to talk about that and bring people up to speed on some updates that we had, and also the issue of the 6 boxes that mysteriously appeared in the DA's office. So to speak about some of these issues and bring people to update on these things, we're going to have Rachel Wolkenstein, who was co-counsel during Mumia Abu-Jamal's post-conviction appeals proceedings between the years of 1995 and 1999. And she's going to give you some updates and legal information that you would need for this information. We're also going to have a number of other speakers, and as they come in, we can introduce them so that people know who they are and know how to address them. First, we'll have Rachel Wolkenstein.
Thank you very much. Okay, I want to begin by saying that not only was I co-counsel during the post-conviction evidentiary hearings before the notorious Judge Albert Sabo from 95 to 99, but I have been a political advocate and legal advocate for Mumia since February 1987. And I consider myself a very close friend of the family. I've been a supporter of the MOVE organization during all those years. In fact, that's how I became involved in the organizations I was with, became involved in defending and fighting for Mumia's freedom, was through our work in defense of the MOVE organization before that, following 1985. So I want to now come to the reason why I'm up here. I've been invited to speak here about the current legal situation with Mumia. First of all, we had a remarkable win on December 27th when Judge Leon Tucker granted Mumia new rights of appeals of all his post-conviction evidentiary hearings and evidence presented that were denied by the Pennsylvania Supreme Court, with then Justice Ronald Castile sitting in there. Judge Tucker's decision is really a historic decision because of the breadth and the import of this decision. He found that Castile's statements, as he was a district attorney, as he was running for Supreme Court justice, and his positions from evidence that came out during those hearings, that he had taken aggressive positions and policy to fight himself for expediting executions against capital prisoners, and particularly those who were convicted as being police killers. Judge Tucker found that this was the appearance of bias and impropriety, and was as such a violation of due process rights to have what's considered to be a fair and impartial tribunal, whether that on the trial level or in the appellate level, and that also he should have adhered to canons of ethics that are supposed to be applicable to judges. This is a very broad finding that goes way beyond Mumia. It's for Mumia. It allows him to reappeal his conviction before the new panel of the Pennsylvania Supreme Court on all the issues that were brought up during over 20 years of litigation that challenged Mumia's conviction on the grounds of his innocence, which he has always maintained, on the fact that he was denied due process rights of every single issue that exists in the so-called right to a fair trial, which exists more in the absence of it than in the actual practice of it in this country, but everything, from the fact that he was denied a jury of his peers, African Americans were excluded from the jury, from the fact he was denied the right of representation that he chose, which was John Africa. His right against self-representation was denied. He had ineffective assistance of counsel, and every single witness in that case were actually coerced, threatened, or given promises to lie outright about Mumia. I don't have the 2 hours it would take for me to go through even the beginning of the evidence of this, but it goes from everything from the falsification of the confession, which was just come 2 months afterwards, and created because of reasons that had happened on the scene, which I cannot go through right now, but I believe that the U.S. Justice Department, as well as then DA Ed Rendell, were absolutely personally and politically involved in the fact of the falsification of the confessions that Mumia supposedly made and did not make when he was critically ill and in the hospital and unable to speak, let alone make ridiculous statements like he tried to kill this cop, which he did not. Okay, the other thing is I want to say about ballistics, because one of the things I was in charge of was actually the ballistics evidence at the post-conviction hearings. That evidence was totally ridiculous and absurd. It first of all began with them saying in the trial, I'll say what they said at the trial, that the bullet that was used was from Mumia's gun and that it actually matched millions of guns. They said that the bullet was too degraded to be able to actually be used. The bullet was in perfectly fine condition if you looked at it. We had it looked at by forensics. They actually disappeared a fragment of a bullet, which actually was taken out of Officer Faulkner's body, as reported in the autopsy report, was disappeared. On the autopsy report, it says that Faulkner was shot by a .48 caliber. So there's so many things, in addition to all the evidence, including confession of somebody who came forward later to say that he, not Mumia, shot police officer Faulkner, has been denied in the courts or not allowed to be in the courts. These are some of the arguments that will be made and re-raised on an appeal. Now, the whole question also of bias, I want to come back to this as I go forward here. We learned in 2001 that Judge Albert Sabo said to another judge, as Mumia's trial was the beginning, that I'm going to help them fry the N, saying the N-word. That's what he did. So from beginning to end, Mumia's case was not only a frame-up of an innocent man, but there was judicial misconduct, prosecutorial misconduct, police misconduct from top to bottom. That means a frame-up. And I say that, and I've said that for, 30 years now. Mumia was framed up. An innocent man was framed up. Okay, so Judge Tucker opened the door to basically having a new appeal set for Mumia. That appeal process, in the normal course of events, could take, even going forward with no objection from the DA's office, 5 years, 10 years, if the DA's office is fighting against it and litigating against it and challenging it. And right now, Larry Krasner is faced with an initial choice, which is whether or not he's going to appeal Judge Tucker's decision. And if he appeals Judge Tucker's decision, that entire proceeding in and of itself will take 5 years, maybe 10 years, going up the Pennsylvania Supreme Court, the Pennsylvania system, and up into the federal courts, if the DA's office fights that himself. Mumia is 65 years old almost. In April, he'll be 65 years old. He is seriously ill. He is ill from the effects of having been on death row in solitary confinement and all that does to him for almost 30 years. From having hepatitis C, which was untreated, which has now left him with cirrhosis of the liver, of a skin disease that is actually leaves him every single day and night itching and in terrible discomfort all the while. You don't know that because he keeps on publishing and speaking and all that, and he does that despite these infirmities that he has. Mumia doesn't have 20 years or 10 years to basically go through the legal system, which takes me to these boxes. Okay, I don't have any questions about these boxes. I have no questions whatsoever. These boxes were secreted away. They were hidden. They were hidden. There's only one reason you hide boxes, whether there's 6 boxes or there's another 20 boxes. You hide them because you're hiding the evidence of what? Not of Mumia's guilt. You're hiding the evidence of Mumia's innocence, the frame-up. And that's what happened here. Okay, how were they found? They weren't found. I mean, I don't want to belabor the fact that the story the DA's office put out 6 days after they supposedly found these boxes. They say they found these boxes on December 28th, one day after Judge Tucker's decision. They say they don't give any explanation of why it took them to January 3rd to inform Judge Tucker of this. 6 days to let a judge know and Mumia's attorneys know that this is what happened, that you found 6 boxes of Mumia's case? I mean, really? And that you found them because DA Krasner and his assistants, they're clear, it was Krasner and his assistants roaming around in what? Inaccessible, remote and largely inaccessible sections of the DA's office. They found these boxes in storage. Okay, well that's absurd. So that right away means there's a cover-up of something. And what's been going on here for years, including in the 2 years that we've been litigating this current issue in front of Judge Tucker, has been a cover-up of the frame-up. And this is just more confirmation of it. Cover-up of the frame-up of an innocent man. So right now, it's been since the 28th, according to what they say when they found these boxes, to now, the 15th. Well, that's over 2 weeks. Over 2 weeks, these boxes, which could only have evidence, how much, I don't know, could have had evidence of the frame-up, have been under the sole control and custody of the DA's office, with absolutely no accountability as to who's looked at them, who's cataloged them, what monitoring there is of them. Okay, I start with that. So I have no question, and when I heard the first night it became available to anybody in the public that this had happened was the night of January 9th. That already was 9 days after they had found, or actually 10 days after they had found these things because of the 31st of December. 10 days before it was publicly known. So all of these are proof, as far as I'm concerned, evidence of the cover-up of the frame-up. Now, I don't know what's going to show up in the end when those boxes are actually looked at and there's some release of information in there. Whether it will be one document that shows the frame-up or more of it, or they come up with the ridiculous thing that there's no evidence in there that Mumia was the victim of a frame-up and a denial of every right that a defendant could have, and that it was racially motivated, politically motivated, and racially biased from top to bottom. So we don't know, but you know what? I have no reason as an attorney and as somebody who's worked on Mumia's case and investigated from top to bottom, from what happened at the scene, the minutes before Faulkner was shot, to the minutes after Mumia was arrested, and everything else afterwards. I know that case, and I know the levels of misconduct and frame-up and vile corruption that was behind Mumia's conviction for a crime he did not commit. And they knew on the scene, the cops, that he did not commit it. So I'm here to say this is where we're at. And as far as I'm concerned, where we're at is this is a cover-up of the frame-up, that we need to demand that everything in those boxes that still exist need to be publicly released. I don't know that I'm speaking for everyone here. They need to be publicly released. And all of this is the final straw. There has been 20 years of evidence put forward that Mumia was innocent and convicted for a crime he did not commit. We have asked, as an attorney working on Mumia's case, our legal papers way back in 95, 96, 97, and 98 called for dismissal of the charges. That's right. That was 20 years ago, right? 20 years ago, based on what we knew then. And we know more now. Right. So as far as I'm concerned, and I believe I speak sharing the opinion of most people in this room, is that we need to demand now, absolutely, these charges need to be dismissed. Right. Whatever legal papers are necessary. But we are not going to wait another 5 years, 10 years, 20 years to keep on litigating this case. It is clear from top to bottom this is corrupt. Mumia is framed. It is time for him to walk out of prison. Yes. And that needs to happen now. Now. And that is the singular demand to be made now, in addition to all the other things we've saying, which have been fine for up to these boxes. The demand is that Krasner needs to dismiss these charges and let Mumia out.
Yes. Free Mumia! Free Mumia! Free Mumia! Free Mumia! Free Mumia!
questions that people may have?
Okay,
Any
I'm
questions?
game.
Does anybody have any questions?
Anyone from the press?
Don't be shy, speak up.
Is there any reporters here? Welcome to challenge me on anything I've said.
Please
Go do
speak
it.
up.
Go
Please
do it.
speak up.
Pam has a question?
My question is, being based on all the evidence that shows a framer, isn't this ground for dismissal
Yes,
of the case?
yes,
Could Krasner call for dismissal?
yes, he could. It's within Krasner's power to say, you know, he would say, I reviewed the case, I've looked at it, these boxes show further, blah, 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 and I am saying that it's time to dismiss the case. He would have to go to a judge to get a judge to agree. At this point, I think the judge who would get this case again for anything else would be Judge Tucker. I presume that's the case. I don't know, but I presume that's who would be. And so, yes, he can. As I said, 20 years ago, 95, our legal papers, based upon what we knew then, and I know a lot more about the case in the investigation done after 95, we called for dismissal based on the level of prosecutorial misconduct that existed. Now it's quadruple that, 100-fold that, and these boxes that were found this way are further confirmation of that.
I read something about a January 30th timeline or date. What is that about?
Okay, it's actually January 26th. Okay, Judge Tucker's order gave Mumia, I mean, he granted on this grounds of basic due process violation, appearance of impropriety. Mumia has to the 26th, actually, to file the appeals. This is totally standard of all the things that were granted. In other words, Judge Tucker granted him new appeal rights. That means Mumia has to file the notices. It's a simple statement. It's like one sentence or two, but it basically says, I am hereby filing appeals to the following decisions. And these would be, basically, I haven't finished counting them, it was basically 4 major overview post-conviction petitions that were denied. So he's denying those, he's appealing those denials that were then, you know, affirmed by the Pennsylvania Supreme. And there are also other things. The fact on the whole question, we asked in 97 for the Supreme Court to give us a remand petition, a remand hearing on the question of those tapes. What was known to people as McMahon tapes. So the DATV, they're the Castile tapes that trained DAs in how to lie and get black jurors disqualified, potential African American jurors disqualified in violation of a Supreme Court decision which had been decided in 1986, Batson versus Maryland, which came out right at the time that Castile took office. This was a training tape to actually get the Philadelphia DAs to learn how to continue to do their policy of excluding African Americans from the jury. So we asked for a hearing on that question to the Pennsylvania Supreme Court because that's where the case went, and because we were technically on appeal at that point. And what and everybody else in the Supreme Court did is they denied our right to have a remand and a hearing about that in 1997. They did grant us 2 remand hearings, which is totally extraordinary. We had a remand hearing to hear the evidence from Veronica Jones, who some of you may know about, a woman who was forced to lie in Mumia's trial and not say that she saw 2 men run away from the scene. But she didn't do what they wanted her to do, which is to point the finger and said that Mumia did the shooting. And when we had the hearing in 97, which we did get 96, basically they had her arrested, and Sabo allowed it, arrested off the witness stand, and because she would not succumb to the threats that he had that she was going to be charged with perjury for telling the truth. There are so many incredible things that have happened in Mumia's case and the legal side of stuff that reflect the political issues of what Mumia represents. Mumia has been gone after because he was a Black Panther Party spokesman at the age of 15. He was on the FBI's target list for being put into detention because he was a young person who, despite his youth, is actually how it was described in the FBI files, Hoover's files, is because despite of his young age, his ability to speak articulately meant he had to be a target. This is what they did to somebody. You want to talk about going after, quote, journalists? He was a radical. He was a Black Panther Party spokesman at the age of 15, and they used all of that to sentence him to death. That's what the DA used his Black Panther. And he was a MOVE supporter. And believe me, that was no accident to them. He had dreads. I mean, the younger people in this room, you know, I'm telling you, back in 1981, when Mumia was arrested, who had dreads in this country? The MOVE family and the Rastas. People who followed the Rastafarians who usually hid their dreads. That's it. Nobody had braids. Nobody had dreads. And the fact that he grew dreads was a sign of his political and personal support for the MOVE organization. And for that, he was hunted out of, you know, establishment journalism for that reason. Okay, I'm going on and on. See how I do that. Okay.
Raza Khan first, and then Basim.
Although it would be nice for Krasner to order dismissal, but isn't that the lawyer's job, his attorney's job to do that?
The attorneys need to make requests. There's no question about it.
Okay.
But Mumia would have been dead. He would have been executed. Despite I was fighting for his life as part of the legal team. I had no desire to see him, but he would not have been alive today if it had not been for the international movement and the people out there being led by the MOVE organization and other organizations working with them, demanding that Mumia's life be saved, that the execution warrant, we went to that hearing with an execution warrant being signed to be implemented on August 17th.
That's right.
And it was not stayed. It was stayed on August 7th. August 7th, 10 days before Mumia was scheduled to be executed. And the only reason that happened, even though, yes, we had legal appeals and all that, is because of the fact that people were out there around the world and in Philadelphia demanding that. And that's why. And that's why.
Paperwork in court for the,
Yes, you need paperwork in court, but we need to make sure that paperwork's in court, but we need to make sure that our voices are heard in Philadelphia, throughout the United States, and internationally, seeking other people, raising their voices with us, that the charges should be dismissed, but that's the legal aspect of it.
That's right.
Mumia needs to be free.
That's
He
right.
needs to walk out of that prison. That is our goal. That's what we have to do. It is a political question as much and equal to, if not many, oftentimes more, than the legal proceedings going on in court.
Basim?
Based off of the findings of the boxes that were found in the room, will Judge Tucker have anything to say? Do you think that Judge Tucker will have anything to say in terms of that being an issue during the hearings when he said that he was tired of kicking the can down the road, and once he make a ruling, is anything going to come up? And that's exactly what happened. After the ruling, something came up pertaining to what he had mentioned in the hearing.
Well, this is a bit, first of all, Judge Tucker decided, some of the press came out right away. I'm going to go back just a little bit. The press came out after the decision saying Mumia lost and he won. No, Mumia won. It does not matter what grounds Mumia won the new appeal rights on. So even though I think he incorrectly did not agree that the evidence was there to show Castile was personally involved, that's the technicality of how we got into court, Mumia won. He won absolutely. Now, right now, as of yesterday, late last night, when I checked the court records again, there's been nothing filed from Mumia's lawyers in response to the notice that they got on at least January 3rd about the fact that these files were found. There is no response from Judge Tucker. The way things usually work, there has to be, going back to Raza Khan's question, there usually has to be something that's filed by the lawyers to say X or Y or Z. That is not there yet. Whether it's coming or not, I cannot say. But I do want to make the point that since Judge Tucker granted Mumia's petition, he really doesn't need to know what's in those boxes because he already granted the petition. He is obviously gonna be really pissed, because he was pissed that the DA did not tell him what was going on. But he doesn't have to change or open things up. At first I thought maybe he did, but no, he really doesn't. But the issues of new evidence, meaning new evidence of the frame-up, which I believe is in those boxes. I believe very strongly, and one thing I can say from my visiting with Mumia the other day is that he believes that evidence is there in those boxes, that there's not a question of it. As I said, whether it's still there or not, I am not going to say or give any representations about. So it could very well be that there will be a piece, even under the most circumstances, there will be something that will come out that will basically make it possible for the lawyers to file a new post-conviction petition based on new evidence filed that supports some of the other things that were said before, or maybe something even new. But as I tried to say at the beginning, and I know this is all legal mumbo-jumbo in a lot of ways, is that a new PCR petition starts the process over again. It begins the process from the beginning. And obviously, anything that needs to be done legally should be done. I'm not suggesting that not be done, but I'm saying we do not want to abide by that or have to be restricted by that timetable, because that process takes years under the best circumstances. So what we have is an opening. We not only have the win of Judge Tucker saying that Mumia's appeal process was biased, which is huge. It is the first win that Mumia's had by a Pennsylvania state court judge in all of these years, since 1981, okay? It's the first win he's had. And that sends a message to the world that there is something that a judge has even said is totally biased. But we can't rely on it. These boxes are explosive. And we have to act like they're explosive. So that's why I started by saying I have no questions about these boxes or what they mean. And even if they try to deny that there's any evidence of Mumia's frame-up in those boxes, as far as I'm concerned, that 6 boxes were hidden away is proof positive that Mumia is innocent and framed, and they know it.
No.
Okay.
Well, he got a new, something new there, right?
Oh, yes, something new?
Right.
Rachel,
Did you see this?
that was submitted this morning, I believe,
Oh,
or yesterday.
no, so it wasn't yesterday. Okay, so now this 14th day of January 2019, in view of the recently discovered boxes by the district attorney, the court will maintain jurisdiction pending review of the boxes filed, as set forth in January 9th, 2019 docketed by correspondence by the Commonwealth. The Commonwealth shall forthwith verify by a supervising attorney, file and docket the location and status of boxes 1 through 29. People know that there were only some boxes that were there. Reference in the January 3rd, 2019 in the location and contents of the reference boxes in accordance with the April 28th, 2017 and June 22, 2017 discovery orders, which are and shall remain perpetual and in effect until otherwise ordered by a court with jurisdiction. So he is saying, Judge Tucker, sorry, thank you, Pam. Judge Tucker is now saying that he is retaining jurisdiction. He is not releasing this, and I presume that means the 30-day orders are basically no longer the valid one, the 30 to file notices of appeal. He is basically saying he's retaining jurisdiction. He wants a total of accounting, not only those 6 boxes, but for those of you who may not know, they listed in those boxes that we had 6 boxes and they were numbered X of 20/29, X/29. That presumes there were 29. The origin of why those are different because the other boxes were 1 through 32 that were come through. So this is a very good development because it means that there is some judicial control. I don't don't mistake this for my saying I have all reliance on Judge Tucker here either. But I'm saying it is a very important development that he is maintaining control over this and telling the DA's office after 2 weeks that they need to explain more than their simply mealy-mouthed thing to the judge in their January 3rd letter. If the judge would like, we'd be happy to turn over these boxes to them. That's what the judge said. All right, this is a positive development. It does not change one iota our task. Our task is to demand dismissal of these charges. This does not change, as far as I'm concerned, the political dynamics of what's here. We have to move on this, we have to assert this, we have to demand that all of this shows the corruption in the prosecution of Mumia and the misconduct, police, prosecutorial, and judicial.
Alright, so my question is, if DA Krasner does not appeal this decision and the ruling becomes final, what precedent does this set for prisoners who are going through similar, if not the same situations? And do you know of any that are going through such situations?
Well, okay, given the, one of the issues in the Castile, just take one of them, is the fact that he said very proudly that there was no problem with the fact that he was in the pocket of the FOP, the Fraternal Order of Police. And he said, when we raised this the first time, back in 1996, he decided in 1998, he said, big deal. 4 out of the 7 justices on the Pennsylvania Supreme Court are all supported by and financed by the FOP. So Judge Tucker's decision is an attack on that. Even though he doesn't use those words exactly, the argument that he made and the reason he gave for seeing that there was bias and a lack of impartiality and appearance of impropriety were all of these things. Castile's saying that, Castile bragging about being responsible for 45 men being on death row and being a law and order judge, etc., etc. So it has weight, but because it's a decision from the Court of Common Pleas, it's not binding in any way on other courts. But it is precedent, and it breaks the back, legally, of this entire notion that is permeated in the American legal system, that actually it is perfectly fine for a judge who's supposed to be impartial. That's the standard. You're supposed to be impartial. No appearance of impropriety or, that you can run with support from the Fraternal Order of Police on a law and order program. And so it is monumental because it's not limited just to Mumia's case, which makes him so happy. It's not limited only to the question of people who are convicted as police killers. It's not limited to capital cases. It's limited to the people who almost every day, maybe not every case, but every day goes through a trial or an appeal in which their judges that are sitting in there, elected judges, which is not the case all over the country, elected judges are elected with the financial support and political support of the Fraternal Order of Police. So this is monumental. And one of the things Mumia said is that he wants any legal action taken on his behalf going future, any of the appeal process, to make sure that there is no judge on that panel who is actually, as he said, in the pocket of the FOP. It was a way of making that point. So somebody asked me about the 30, you asked about the 30 days too, right? Somebody asked the question. The 30 days is sort of gone right now by this recent thing that I just read, that I just learned about from Judge Tucker, because that was about 30 days from his order. He's effectively saying, my order is sort of stayed for a moment. It doesn't change his opinion, but I am going to look at these boxes. And he's also implying there, he doesn't say the words, that anything that comes out of those boxes he will take into consideration. And then that becomes a much bigger question even. It goes then the due process and the appeal process. It then goes to what's he sees in those boxes and how the DA's office has worked. And he found in his earlier decision granting Mumia new appeal rights, he was very disturbed by the fact, and he said this, that the DA's office did not retain and preserve several memos by Castile. He was very disturbed by it. He said that this was wrong. How could, in a case like this, which he described as one of the most controversial cases, not just in Philadelphia, not just in Pennsylvania, not just in the United States, but around the world, how in a case like that could the prosecution's office not retain every piece of paper on Mumia's case? So for a judge who did that and said that, one could imagine, if he let it out, let loose, his distress and the implications of these boxes, 6 boxes being missing and not cataloged as part of any official record. And what does that mean? Where are the other boxes? He's now saying, I think you have to prove, is it just the 6 boxes? And but are there the other 23 boxes as well? So it's a big deal. And again, all of these are reasons not for us to feel like it's going to be okay now because Judge Tucker's on it. I want to really caution anybody to think, okay, it's all going to be okay. No, it's not going to be okay unless we're on the streets and we're in the newspapers and we're all and go to trade unions and church groups and community groups and ministers. We demand Mumia's freedom now.
That's right.
The legal stuff will follow that, and the legal basis for that is there because, since as far as I know, except for Sada getting out of prison, which, led to various people being instituted, the only people I know of in the history of this country, somebody more involved, who got out of jail by being broken out of jail with no consequences, were fugitive slaves who were broken out of prisons and jails in the course of the abolitionist movement in the days before the Civil War. We're not in days of a civil war right now where our prisoners are going to be broken out of prison that way.
Right.
But we can demand that based on the entire history of this case, the racial injustice, the class bias in this thing, and the whole facts and everything and circumstances surrounding Mumia's arrest, conviction, and death sentence, which speaks to everything corrupt and politically outrageous about this system. Okay? And this happened to him because of his defense of the MOVE organization most immediately, and the fact that those cops knew Mumia. It was 10 years. It was only a 10-year period of time. Those of us who are older know what a short period of time Mumia is. 10 years is. From the time that Mumia was speaking out in the Church of the Advocate and in the newspapers against the murder of the Panthers by the FBI to the time he became an outspoken supporter standing alone from the journalists in terms of for the MOVE organization. 10 years. And the cops on the scene knew exactly who Mumia was and is. Those cops on the scene, and particularly the chief cop who was there, an inspector, had been the same very inspector who led the raids on the Black Panther Party headquarters. He was the same inspector that was in charge of the year-round blockade of the Powhatan Village commune of the MOVE organization that Mumia went to all the time. They knew who Mumia was, and as I said at the beginning or a middle or somewhere, the FBI had Mumia on their extermination list from the time he was 15 years old.
And the documents show that.
And yes, the documents show that. Believe me, the FBI files we have on him that we tried to present at his trial, by the way, his hearings in '95, they were not allowed to be presented.
And I'm sorry I was late today, but just your reaction, because when I found out about these 6 boxes, what was the immediate reaction, and what does it mean for this case? And I'm sorry you already said.
The immediate reaction I had was actually in the WHYY article. But it was basically, my immediate reaction is that these files should be released to the public, that in fact they are proof of the cover-up of the frame-up. They are confirmation of what we've known for decades, that there's hidden exculpatory evidence in Mumia's case, and that the evidence that Mumia's guilt was intentionally manufactured by the police and prosecution, and the truth of his innocence was suppressed. And the remedy is nothing less than dismissal of the charges against Mumia and his freedom from prison.
Yes.
I have a question. Why is it so important to release the files to the public?
Because I think it's a chance for the people to see exactly what is in there and what the evidence has been in every possible way. Because in fact, the courts have not allowed that out. I mean, when we litigated from 95 through 99, we were not allowed any discovery, not any file. Everything we got, there was evidence to show the frame of, we got through investigators who knew how to find things, let me put it that way, who knew how to find it, and legwork from people who were assisting us from around the MOVE organization, our own other investigators that actually went out and hunted and talked to people about it. We got nothing from Judge Sabo, from the prosecution, nothing at all. People have a right to know what's there because it will show exactly how it will turn out. I don't know. I can tell you it can be as simple as the fact, as simple as the simple of type of misconduct, which happens all the time, that the main witness against Mumia that they used, Cynthia White, was coerced into lying. It could be that simple. I consider that the motherhood and apple pie of police misconduct and prosecute, meaning the everyday normal thing that happens every damn day to everybody.
Expose them.
Have you all seen the box? Have you been provided copies yet?
No, of course not. No, of course not. Judge Tucker is now saying he wants accountability of those
And
boxes.
is that the next goal, to be able to get access?
It
to
certainly
those
is, I think, the goal of all of us here in this room. How that will play out or not. Judges normally do not release files publicly. They very often do not even release them to the attorneys on the case. They look at them themselves, which in all due respect is not the best way, because you have to know something about the case to see what is important. You have to know what happened. You have to know what they said the evidence was. You have to know how people came out and post-conviction and explained the lies that were told. You have to sort of know what you're looking for. And I could go through a lot of examples of it. That's how it is. And the thing about it is the prosecution and the cops are so arrogant, and they are so sure they will never be caught out. You would be shocked at the things that they leave in those files. They don't automatically get rid of all the evidence of their corruption and their misconduct. There's amazing things are there. Now, whether or not they're still there, I cannot say. Just like I know that there was evidence of Castile's involvement in Mumia's case, that over 2 years of supposedly looking at all the boxes, the DA's office said there was nothing. Even the stuff that was proof of it, they said was nothing. But I know all the things that Castile had to have been involved in Mumia's case. I know exactly the issues that even if it wasn't Mumia Abu-Jamal, because of the significance of the appeals that Mumia was raising, fundamental, trial issues of, African Americans being kept off of jurors, about the fact of misconduct by the DA's office in arguing for Mumia's death sentence, and also the fact they used his Black Panther Party membership to argue to the jury he should be sentenced to death. Literally, what he said when he was 16 years old.
Yeah, a couple of questions. Has DA Krasner, since the finding of these files, made any public statements that we're aware of? And the coincidence that the discovery of these boxes came one day after Tucker's ruling against the Commonwealth raises, I think, a question: had it gone the other way, would these boxes have ever seen the light of day?
These are all very, interesting speculations. I have, various theories over when these boxes were found, how they were found, all that. I don't think they're particularly, no offense, I don't think they're particularly relevant. I think the timeline says it all.
Yes.
The timeline says it all. We had a win for Mumia on the 27th of Judge Tucker, unheard of and precedential, historic in the breadth of what it is. The next day, they supposedly find these in this absurd, ridiculous story that makes no sense whatsoever. They don't tell anybody about this. They tell not the judge for 6 other days. Okay? That sort of says it all. In some sense, that says it all. And, whether this came from somebody said, now's the time for me to say that these boxes are there and I'm going to let them know, I don't know. but whether Krasner knew or not about them before, I don't really care. I mean, yes, I mean, I'm not interested in the whole history of it, except for the fact that I mean, yes, it is interesting, but I don't think that's where the energy, in my own opinion, goes. It goes to the fact of, that to do what we need to do to make the argument that this warrants the dismissal of the charges, and that it is totally suspicious, etc. One last thing about whose other name was on it. I did some research afterwards. This guy, Ed McCain. Who is Ed McCain? Mumia explained to me who Ed McCain was, because I hadn't heard of him. He wasn't part of the stuff. He was the first, the first assistant to Seth Williams. The last 4 years that he was a DA, assistant DA. He was the first assistant to Seth Williams. He had been and he was used by Seth Williams, even though he wasn't necessarily the spokesman, to be the person to come out and talk about cases. Now, what did Ed McCain do most recently after he was out of the DA's office? He left in 2015. Okay, so after Krasner fired various DAs, the FOP had a basically testimonial for those guys, for those 31 DAs. And the main speaker at that was Ed McCain. Okay, so, you know, I didn't know who he was. You know, it's neither here nor there, but this is what the man is. He was the main spokesman, and he was the person quoted in the article that, he was actually, it was talked about in the New Yorker article. Actually, when I went back and found it, the New Yorker article talking about all the great things that Krasner was doing and, you know, the problems he had, they cited McCain in his speech at the FOP event. Wow. So that gives you another window into this.
One last question from Rachel, and then we're going to move on to the next speaker. Anyone? I have one. Okay.
Probably you mentioned this already, but I believe McCann was also the person who created the training video. How to
No, it's
sorry.
okay. His name was
McMahon.
Another McMahon. But I again, and we called it when we learned about it, the McMahon video. That's what it's called. But that's a cover up for Castile, because it was produced by DATV and Castile's name on it. So this is an error that gets made all the time. Just like we concentrated on Joe McGill as the prosecutor, when we should have concentrated as much, if not more, on Ed Rendell, who had to be in charge of every single element of the prosecution of Mumia. So I'm just saying, but
thank you for allowing that clarification.
Thank you, Rachel.
There were two other judges that was favorable to Mumia based on evidence that they found out during, you know, the process. What are those two judges, and could you shortly say what it was that they found?
You're going to have to remind me what start me.
Judges Scranton.
Oh, yes, okay, I was talking about the criminal case, okay. So,
Right,
okay.
no, but I'm just saying,
Yeah,
you know,
right.
proof of a frame up that was
Exactly,
also found by other judges.
Exactly. So Mumia's statement that he put out right after he heard about himself, and he repeated to me, is, now I know what it's like to be in front of a judge in a criminal, in my criminal case, who was not in the pocket of the FOP. Right. So what Pam is referring to was the civil judge, the federal judge, that heard the whole hepatitis C issue for Mumia and granted Mumia hepatitis C treatment, and found that it was what the DOC was doing was unconstitutional, that there are protocols that basically said that nobody can even be considered for hepatitis C treatment until they're literally ready to die. I mean, that's the vernacular of it. Judge Mariani basically had a whole hearing. He moved expeditiously on this. He listened to our witnesses. He listened to our doctors. He called the the DOC attorney to task for misrepresenting the record. And by the way, the DOC is still appealing that now to the Third Circuit, even though Mumia's already been treated. But that became a historic decision. That's another historic decision, which is as it's been used as precedent around the country in fights for other prisoners in other states, as well as in Pennsylvania, to get hepatitis C treatment. Who's the other?
The other judge.
Oh, in the federal court. Okay,
Right.
another federal court judge. This is what leads people to think we got Judge Yan. We have two judges then, okay. So Mumia's death sentence was overturned by a federal court judge, Judge Yan, in 2001. He did not agree with any of the charges, any of the legal arguments against Mumia's conviction. He did not grant an evidentiary hearing, but he found that Judge Sabo's charge to the jury was totally, again, false, biased, and everything, and misled the jury on whether or not their consideration of sentencing Mumia to death. I want to make a point about the timeline here, and it affects everything I've been saying about not demanding Mumia's freedom right now. Judge Yan made that decision in December 2001. The DA's office fought that decision to the Court of Appeals, Federal Court of Appeals, to the U.S. Supreme Court. It went back to the Federal Court of Appeals, and they brought it back up to the DA's office, brought it back up to the Supreme Court. It took 10 full years. All the while, Mumia sat in solitary confinement on death row, even though his death sentence had been ruled unconstitutional. It took 10 years before he was gotten off of death row. 10 years.
That's criminal.
It is criminal, but that's, unfortunately, that's how the legal system works, unless we do something different to insist that this move at a different pace, and we have the evidence to push it. Not that we needed the evidence to push it, but we have new evidence to push it, and we have sort of enough is enough, and we need to get Mumia out now. Is that okay? Okay, there was another judge too that Mumia actually got his right to basically to be able to publish, and it was a federal court judge in '95 too, right? I was there too, right?
Okay, free Mumia!